Howdy everyone, and welcome back to the Luna Geeks Out channel, and we are doing a very special reaction today because we are finally checking out Monochrome by BABYMETAL. This took far too long to get to because first there's the Trident reaction I had to film, that got delayed because of a lot of different stuff, and in this one, I've got this notebook here, which contains 7 pages of notes of research I did for this. 7 pages of notes for the Silly Chocolate Band. What is this timeline we have found ourselves in? This was supposed to be a nice, easy reaction, quick lyrical analysis, quick review portion, just some fun checking out my favorite band. It's been probably a week worth of research. This sure is fun. It's been too long. Let's go and hop into it. Okay, heavy start, nice. Good electronics in there. Great guitar there. Great drums as well. Oh, that is a super good tone right there. Interesting vocals, reminding me of, there's one song, there's also a hint of, From Dusk Till Dawn, but there's also something off of Metal Galaxy I'm reminded of here. Love that right there. This is really something else. It's not a BABYMETAL track, but reminded me of something. Oh, that little flash right there. I'll get into that later. That was, that flash right there is, like, weirdly powerful. You wouldn't think it would be so meaningful at first glance. Yeah, the imagery throughout this is there's a lot to dive into with it, and I will, trust me, I will. This is some great stuff right here. Alright, a little hint of vocal distortion. That's kind of reminding me of it's the bonus track, BBAB. Which is a similar tune as well. And again, great imagery here that I'll dive into later. Oh, that shot right there. Oh, that's some good... Again, I'll dive into all of that in a bit, but oh boy. That, whew. Oh, that right there. Just smile. That's nice. What's the phrase I'm looking for? Good, point to leave into the good... Oh, how do I need to phrase this? It ties in well with the rest of the lyrics. And that right there, again, great imagery throughout this. But yeah, that is, Monochrome by BABYMETAL. Absolutely phenomenal. maybe the best song I've heard from him. Was that just Smile During the Lyrics? Yes, it was. I had not noticed that the several times I read through the lyrics somehow. But there's a lot to dive into with this. We'll get into all the research in a bit, but there's a whole rant to go on first. When I read through lyrics, I tend to have a very literal look at them, right? That's just how I'm wired, and this song really has 3 levels, only one of which is that sort of more literal level I would have looked at. The first level, cannot talk about, because it is the lore. Album's not out yet, probably wouldn't even be able to decipher the lore, even when it was, because it's baby metal lore, and it's confusing. But there is that level. There is a very literal story being told throughout this whole album. The second level, the one that I would look at, is that more literal reading of it. And essentially this song is about, why is this flickering? Essentially this song is about sort of pushing on through hardships, continuing to go on, this idea that despite all of it, there will be sort of a light at the end of the tunnel. There is, you're going to survive it, everything like that. And you get, of course, the biggest thing that supports that is, where is it, the bridge. During the dusk of Ragnarok, what are we to see? No matter how long the night, the morning will arrive. And there's 2 things that are really good in that. One, that idea of Ragnarok, of course, this fictional war from Norse mythology that destroys the entire universe, I guess. This horrible thing. That idea that you continue on past that sort of the most horrible thing ever, basically. But then that second part, no matter how long the night, the morning will arrive, is great on 2 levels. There's lots of ideas of the night here, and you have light versus dark. And of course, dark is very much this bad thing. It's, it's where the monsters dwell. And if you hear about something bad happening, you're going to picture it at night and everything. And then, the light is when all that fades away. And that the night, this time of dark, at the end of it, the morning arrives, the light arrives. But also there is, in English, I can't remember if this was a line delivered in English or in Japanese, but in English, of course, morning and morning with a U sound exactly the same. And a good sort of double meaning there, where at the end of this there is morning as well. So very good stuff there. And the idea of, what color can we imagine the night sky, lighting up the night sky with the firework, everything like that. The idea of perhaps finding some beauty in the midst of this, finding some strength in the midst of this. There's lots of good stuff in here. Ignoring this third level I'm going to get to in a moment, this is some of the best lyricism BABYMETAL have had that I've read. Of course, I haven't looked too intensely at some of their previous stuff, but certainly this, a very, very good lyricism. But then we get to the third level, which it is a good thing that I ended up being delayed a few days before I was able to start working on this, because I probably would have missed this. A lot of folks were talking about how this has some very clear ties to the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. And when I first saw that, I was like, alright, these folks have got to be going crazy. Then I read through the Reddit threads, looked at some of the imagery they were comparing to and everything. I was like, alright, they're onto something. So I went, let me take a look at my collection of historical books, see if I have anything helpful. And the first thing I saw was this massive book, The Time-Life History of World War II, which is actually quite nice. It's just a good basic overview, lots of images, a decent amount of information. But the section on the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is one double page on the bombings themselves, and one double page on sort of the response, artwork and everything. Nice stuff, but not a lot there, and it doesn't go too in-depth. But then I noticed, tucked in between a couple other books, I noticed this. This is a copy of Hiroshima by John Hersey. Actually, first edition. No idea how I ended up with it. It's like, ooh, struck gold there. Started reading through it, and this is one of the most impactful books I've ever read. If y'all have not read this yet, would highly recommend it. Very moving book. After each chapter, I had to sit in silence for a little bit on that first read through, because, oh boy, it gets to ya. Yes, very, very good book. But so, as I read through that, I started making more and more connections and everything like, this makes too much sense. Like, it is weird how many connections there are between this song and Hiroshima. And certainly, I'm looking for this stuff, right? I'm looking for connections, so it's easy to see. But I legitimately believe that this song, if not directly about it, is very heavily inspired by it. But before I get to all those connections, I do need to give sort of a historical lesson on it, and that includes going into some rather graphic specifics, and this is some dark stuff. I'm going to be reading some direct quotations and everything. So I'm not going to be showing any images, but I am going to be describing stuff, so if that is too much for y'all, I do implore you to listen. I think this is history that everyone should hear, but if it is too much for you, timestamp at the bottom, skip to that. It'll be in the description as well. You can click on it and skip right to it. You can skip past the history section and just get the lyrical analysis where I really dive into the connections, or I won't be going in depth into that. But I would implore you to go and listen to the whole thing, because it is some important history. But yeah, let's skip past this if that will be too much for you, because it is some very dark stuff. But for those of y'all sticking around, let's get into the history. So, basically, Hiroshima had been fortunate enough to avoid a lot of conflict throughout the war, right? It certainly had some impact from the war in it, but it hadn't really had any bombing raids, anything like that, to the best of my understanding. And so people were starting to prepare for something, because they knew they were going to be hit eventually. They just didn't know when. And so Hershey's book at one point mentions how one of the survivors' neighbors is basically boarding up his windows, so tearing apart his house in order to board up his windows to protect himself better. So that there is preparation happening for something, right? They have designated safe zones, they have sort of air raid shelters and stuff. They just didn't know what was going to come. So, the morning of August 6th, 1945, at 7 a.m., there was an air raid warning. And then at 8 a.m., the all clear was sounded. And then 8:15 a.m., oh boy, there's a nuke. And it's rather depressing to think that perhaps if that all clear hadn't sounded, if people had continued to sort of stay in that more cautious sort of element, I suppose, and had continued to stay in whatever shelter they may have had, it's depressing to think that perhaps lives would have been saved, but let's avoid that, because this is already depressing enough as is. But the blast itself is horrifying. Like, it is almost incomprehensible to me, because basically, one of the first things that is mentioned in Hershey's book is that no one, or almost no one, remembers actually hearing a blast. There was someone who, I want to say like 25 miles away, who heard something louder than when a city 5 miles away got bombed, but no one in Hiroshima really remembered hearing anything. It was just this bright flash of light, and the world collapsed around them. But there are a few things in terms of statistics that I wanted to point out, coming from the Time book. So the first thing is that the air bursts from the explosion had the pressure that matched the sustained thrust of a tidal wave. That's insane! And then what's even wilder, and like, so I gotta go off on a tangent real quick. My understanding of this for the longest time has been very simple. Us Americans, we created this big bomb, we dropped it on a city because the Japanese weren't surrendering, killed a bunch of folks, destroyed the city, the Japanese didn't surrender, so we had another bomb, we dropped that bomb, killed a bunch more folks, destroyed another city, and then the Japanese surrendered. That was my understanding of what happened, right? I mean, I saw, that one iconic image of, the lady who had, like, the pattern of her clothes burnt into her. I saw the iconic image of that one building still standing in Hiroshima, different stuff like that, but didn't really understand the extent of it, and so many things. And as I've read throughout this more, I understand more and more of it, and more of it just, I can't figure this out. I can't figure out how this happened. I can't figure out why this happened. It messes with me. And this is the one fact that, like, breaks me. The rest of it, I don't fully understand it. I don't like it, but I can kind of get it. This, my mind refuses to comprehend this, because the time book basically says that the heat from the blast was in the thousands of degrees. And I was like, alright, that's pretty hot. Let me go and find some specifics. So, the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum says that the heat from the blast was 7,700 degrees Celsius, or 13,892 degrees Fahrenheit, going off just a quick conversion on Google. That's pretty dang hot. And then I remembered something I'd heard, that I couldn't remember where I'd heard it, but I was like, let me check this. So I look up the temperature of the sun. And, like, the core of the sun is in the tens of millions of degrees. That's, alright, yeah, that's pretty hot. But the surface of the sun is apparently roughly 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly 6,000 degrees Celsius. How did we make a bomb that produces heat hotter than the surface of the sun? How is that possible? Like, seriously, can someone who understands science explain that to me in the comments? That breaks me. And that explains so much as well about how people were literally vaporized on the spot, how it caused such intense fire and everything, how it destroyed the city in such a manner. But how does that happen, right? And that's just the beginning of this. You would think that this immediate blast that kills so many people instantly and destroys a city is the bad part, but no, it gets worse. Now there's one account from Hershey's book of the blast itself that I really want to point out, because it is a fascinating one. This is the one that really stood out. I mean, they were all very powerful, but this one stood out to me. It's following one of the survivors, Mrs. Nakamura, and it says, as Mrs. Nakamura stood watching her neighbor, everything flashed wider than any white she had ever seen. She did not notice what happened to the man next door. The reflex of a mother set her in motion towards her children. She had taken a single step. The house was 1,350 yards, or 3/4 of a mile, from the center of the explosion, when something picked her up and she seemed to fly into the next room, over the raised sleeping platform, pursued by parts of her house. And, just everything about that, the fact that this is like 3/4 of a mile away from the blast, it's that powerful, that it's wider than any white she had ever seen, all these different things, and then there's other things. One of the survivors had a hospital that literally collapsed into the river. It's a whole lot. But so immediately after the blast, you start to see fires spreading, not necessarily caused by the blast itself, but by debris landing on, like, stovetops and live wires and stuff like that. And in the immediate aftermath, no one really knew what had happened. A lot of survivors thought that a bomb had been dropped directly on the building they were in. And because, I mean, a bomb that powerful, incomprehensible, never been seen before. A lot of them thought it was a Molotov flower basket or a cluster bomb. And then in this blast, there were 150 doctors in the city, 65 of whom were killed immediately. The most of the surviving doctors were wounded to the point of being unable to help. And then there were 1,780 nurses in the city, 1,654 of which were either dead or incapacitated due to the blast. And again, another quote that really illustrates the power of this. In a city of 245,000, nearly 100,000 people had been killed or doomed at one blow. 100,000 more were hurt. At least 10,000 of the wounded had made their way to the best hospital in town, which is altogether unequal to such a trampling, since it had only 600 beds, and they had all been occupied. This is... No one was prepared for this. They knew an attack was coming eventually, but this was incomprehensible to them. In this immediate aftermath, there's so many things that happened. There is one account in Hershey's book that I am sure happened several times that it's just, oh, there is this one man, Mr. Fukai, I believe I have the name right there, who is the secretary of the diocese, which I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He worked at one of the churches of one of the survivors, Father Kleinzorg, I think his name was. And they were trying to get him out of this building, and they got him a little ways away, but Father Kleinzorg was injured. He was suffering from diarrhea from a few days ago. Several factors collapsed, lost his grip on him, and Mr. Fukai ran back towards the building, likely back into the flames. And he had, a few days prior, said, "Japan is dying. If there is a real air raid here in Hiroshima, I want to die with our country." And going off of some later stuff towards the end of the book, which I'll get into in a little bit, I would not be surprised at all to find that is a somewhat common thing that happened. Then another one of the survivors, Mr. Tanimoto, is going into the center of the city to find his wife, and he passes survivors heading towards the outer areas of the city trying to find help. And this is the first time I'd ever really read the impact the blast had on people, and it's some horrifying stuff. He was the only person making his way into the city. He met hundreds and hundreds who were fleeing, and every one of them seemed to be hurt in some way. The eyebrows of some were burned off, and skin hung from their faces and hands. Others, because of pain, held their arms up as if carrying something in both hands. Some were naked or in shreds of clothing. On some undressed bodies, the burns had made patterns of undershirt straps and suspenders, and on the skin of some women, since white repelled the heat from the bomb, and dark clothes absorbed it and conducted it to the skin, the shapes of flowers they had on their kimonos. Many, although uninjured themselves, supported relatives who were worse off. Almost all had their heads bowed, looked straight ahead, were silent, and showed no expression whatsoever. And that is just in the immediate aftermath of this, really, in just the first few hours. As the afternoon comes around, something new starts to appear. A woman named Iwasaki, who lived in the neighborhood of the mission and who was sitting near the Nakamuras, got up and asked the priests if she should stay or go with them. Father Kleinzorg said, "I hardly know where the safest place is." She stayed there, and later in the day, though she had no visible wounds or burns, she died. There's something new appearing because of this blast. We now know it to be radiation sickness, of course, but at this point, all anyone knew is that some people were just dying, and it gets worse from there. I'll get into that again later on, but it's a whole lot. Hey guys, Editing Luna here. Just gotta make a quick interjection because there is a quote from the Time Life book that I meant to throw in there, and because it was on a different page, I completely forgot about it, so I'm just gonna say it real quick. Thus, to the list of terrors introduced by the atomic bomb was added another, the terror of the unknown. Of course, tying into that idea of radiation sickness being something that had been never before seen, and of course something that, when they don't know what it is or how to treat it or even why these people are dying, that's a terrifying thing. But that's the end of the quote. That's the end of my commentary on it, so I'll let y'all get back to the main video. But then we get into it as the day continues, as survivors are starting to set up camp, as people are starting to basically figure out what to do. There's this, again, from Hirsch's book, which is my main source, there's this quote that, heavily focusing on quotes here. "The hurt ones were quiet. No one wept, much less screamed in pain. No one complained. None of the many who died did so noisily. Not even the children cried. Very few people even spoke." There's this silent bearing of this. It's also, so many people are hurt that the one person just fades away. Everyone understands that other people are hurt as well, and they don't necessarily make a spectacle out of themselves, in a sense. It's just that idea of just everyone just being silent throughout this is just, it's incredibly haunting. But then later in the afternoon again, there's at one point some planes heard. This was in Asano Park, which I believe in Hiroshima is called Shikayen. I'll have to edit that on screen for the proper title if I've got it wrong. But the planes are heard overhead, and they have theories that it's, Grumman's coming to strafe them to finish them off, more planes coming to drop bombs, something like that. And, the rain starts to fall, and everyone is just so terrified that they think that the Americans are literally dropping gasoline from the sky in order to just feed the flames and just finish them off once and for all. It's horrifying stuff. It heavily impacted these people. And then survivors, as they started out into the city to try to find supplies, to try to find help, they didn't recognize it. But again, a quotation: from a busy city of 245,000 that morning to a mere pattern of residue in the afternoon. That this city it's gone. It is not even a semblance of what it once was. It is unrecognizable. And just the fact that there is a weapon with that power is just horrifying. In the midst of this, there is some comfort, though. Some of those survivors, again, something that I can assume was a fairly widespread occurrence, some of the survivors found a garden that basically the food in it had been baked by the heat of the blast, pumpkins and potatoes and stuff like that. And so in the midst of all of this, they were able to have themselves a rather nice feast, because the heat from this had cooked them a nice meal. And of course, as the day progressed, there were several theories that rose, like the gasoline that I mentioned, the cluster of incendiary bombs, even parachutists falling down from the sky and doing stuff. No one knew what was happening. Again, this was incomprehensible to them. This was something that they never could have possibly guessed. Now, later in the evening of the 6th, the naval launch went up the different rivers, telling people that help was on the way, that there was a Navy hospital ship incoming, stuff like that. And it did come, but a lot of people never really received that help. A lot of people did, but a lot of people didn't. And it's just there's so much that the Navy coming in to help were unable to do much for most people. And it's just horrifying stuff. Now, I can't remember exactly when this took place, but there is an account from one of the men, Father Kleinzog, I believe, encountering a group of soldiers that, again, I have to read, because this is probably the single most striking account of the injuries in the book. Their faces were wholly burned, their eye sockets were hollow. The fluid from their eyes had run down their cheeks. They must have had their faces upturned when the bomb went off. Perhaps they were anti-aircraft personnel. Their mouths were mere swollen, pus-covered wounds, which they could not bear to stretch enough to admit the spout of the teapot. Just that image of looking up when this blast goes off and not just losing sight in your eyes, but having your eyes literally melt is just... Oh! I don't think there's a word I can say to describe that. That sound doesn't describe that. It's just... That as the days continue, people start to be sent off to military hospitals to get some help. On August 7th, there's a radio broadcast that says what happened that most people in Hiroshima didn't hear. On August 9th, there is, of course, the bombing of Nagasaki. Most people in Hiroshima didn't know for days that they had companions in this. They continue to think they are the only ones because they were just cut off because of this. Now, theories continue to spread. The one that interested me the most was this one. The journalist was apparently saying that it was not a bomb at all, but a kind of fine magnesium powder sprayed over the whole city by a single plane, and it exploded where it came into contact with the live wires of the city power system. Now, I've tried to do some research to see if there's any sort of scientific basis for this, and I haven't found anything. Maybe there is, but like I said, I haven't found it. So, should I get any answers, I'll let them in, but no telling. I think it really is just another attempt to explain the unexplainable. 2 days after the bombing of Nagasaki on August 11th, civilian casualties have started to be evacuated from the military hospital on Ninoshima Island in order to make room for military casualties. Roughly a week later, the truth of what happened is known widespread. And then on August 15th, this is basically the closest thing we have to a fun fact in this whole story. This was the first time the Emperor spoke over the radio, the first time his voice had been publicly broadcast, and it was done so to announce the surrender. And there are accounts of people basically realizing what was happening, that this was the Emperor speaking to them. There's this sense of, like, honor they felt that he was doing this, that he was speaking to them. And of course, this sadness that they realized that it was to surrender as well. Just a fascinating thing when, of course, a lot of other leaders, you were hearing their voices. So this realization that this was not only the first time Emperor Hirohito had spoken over the radio, spoken publicly, this was the first that it was done so to announce surrender. Is just fascinating. But then roughly a month after the bomb is dropped, you start to see life return to the city. Miss Sasaki, one of the survivors, is brought back to a hospital in Hiroshima, and there is this passage, which is probably my personal favorite from this book. Over everything, up through the wreckage of the city, in gutters along the riverbanks, tangled among tiles and tin roofing, climbing on charred tree trunks, was a blanket of fresh, vivid, lush, optimistic green. The verdancy rose ever from the foundations of ruined houses. Weeds already hid the ashes, and wildflowers were in bloom among the city's bones. The bomb had not only left the underground organs of plants intact, it had stimulated them. Everywhere were bluets and Spanish bayonets, goosefoot, morning glories and daylilies, the hairy fruited bean, purslane and clotbur, and sesame and panic grass and feverfew. Just this image of, in the midst of all this desolation, life starting to return and really starting to make it something absolutely beautiful. It's just, it's the comfort that was so desperately needed. And roughly a year after the bomb, things are starting to return to normal. Radiation sickness is starting to be understood and starting to be treated. People are really starting to return to Hiroshima to live there. And there's this passage again from Hersey's book. It's just fascinating to me. Again, a year after the bomb was dropped, Miss Sasaki was a cripple, Mrs. Nakamura was destitute. Father Kleinsorger was back in the hospital. Dr. Sasaki, who, as an aside, was not related to Miss Sasaki, just an interesting coincidence. Dr. Sasaki was not capable of the work he once could do. Dr. Fuji had lost the 30-room hospital it took him many years to acquire and had no prospects of rebuilding it. Mr. Tanimoto's church had been ruined and he no longer had his exceptional vitality. The lives of these 6 people, who are among the luckiest in Hiroshima, would never be the same. That idea that they are among the luckiest people, one of whom nearly lost her leg, most of whom lost their livelihoods, they're the lucky ones. It's just, again, it's incomprehensible. But then there are 2 things from Hersey's book that I really want to leave us with at the end of this. One, well, actually 3 things. One is, throughout all of this, a lot of people really found some honor in dying for their country and some peace in that. Talks about this group of schoolgirls who got buried under this wall that had collapsed on them. Only one of them managed to survive, and as they were dying, they were just singing the national anthem. This man and his son buried under their house, who basically resolved that if they're going to die, then they're going to die for their emperor, and this comfort found in that, it's fascinating to me. And then there's a lot of comparisons sort of to London in the Blitz and things like that. It's just sort of camaraderie throughout this, everyone coming together to try to help each other as well. There's this comfort at the end of this book that was sorely needed. But then one of the German Jesuits, Father Siemens, Father Siemens, I don't know how to pronounce that. He writes a report to the Holy See in Rome and says, "Some of us consider the bomb in the same category as poison gas and were against its use on a civilian population. Others are of the opinion that in total war, as carried on in Japan, there is no difference between civilians and soldiers, and that the bomb itself was an effective force tending to end the bloodshed, warning Japan to surrender and thus to avoid total destruction. It seems logical that he who supports total war in principle cannot complain of war against civilians. The crux of the matter is whether total war in its present form is justifiable, even when it serves a just purpose. Does it not have material and spiritual evil as its consequences which far exceed whatever good might result? When will our moralists give us a clear answer to this question?" And there are a couple things I want to point out with that. One, we see a lot of debate today over whether or not the bomb was justified, whether it was a good thing or not, whether it actually amounted to anything good. And that's something I definitely need to research more heavily. I really wanted to focus just on the bombing of Hiroshima for this video instead of the broader context around it. But that idea that the question of whether or not this was moral, whether or not this was justifiable, was happening back then as well, is just something that I think is a good reminder that these questions have been ongoing. And then just that point of total war, if you support total war, this is part of that as well, I think is an important thing to remember. And then the final thing the book leaves on is the experience of a child. It's this very simple summarization of everything that I want to leave y'all with at the end of this, because it's some fascinating stuff, and I think perfectly sums this up in a way that a lot of us can understand, because as a child looks at it, they don't understand the full meaning of it. It's just what happened. The day before the bomb, I went for a swim. In the morning, I was eating peanuts. I saw a light. I was knocked to little sister's sleeping place. When you're saved, I can only see as far as the tram. My mother and I started to pack our things. The neighbors were walking around burned and bleeding. Hataya-san told me to run away with her. I said I wanted to wait for my mother. We went to the park. A whirlwind came. At night, a gas tank burned, and I saw the reflection in the river. We stayed in the park one night. Next day, I went to Taiko Bridge and met my girlfriends Kikuki and Murakami. They were looking for their mothers. But Kikuki's mother was wounded, and Murakami's mother, alas, was dead. Just the simplicity of the sort of how a child viewed it is just fascinating, and also horrifying that the children went through this as well. But that's going to do it for the sort of history section of this, so let's get into the analysis into how the Baby Metal song really ties into this. But before we get into that, I do need to go for one more tangent. Basically, when looking at sort of historical kind of stuff, there's a lot of different sort of ways to do it. There's things that are very literal representations, and if you want to stick with this idea of nuclear warfare, look at, say, Manhattan Project by Rush or Nuclear Attack by Sabaton. These are songs that are very literal in terms of the representation of this. It's not perhaps a deeper meaning, it is just telling the story of the event. Of course, the Rush song is a bit more poetic than the Sabaton song, but it's very literally about that. Then you get songs that are more just some kind of representations of this broader idea. I believe it's Down from the Sky by Trivium, which is just a broader anti-nuclear war song. It doesn't necessarily have any direct references to nuclear war, but it's very clear that that is what it is about. Then you have things like, say, The Living Will Envy the Dead by We Are Magonia, which is basically not related, aside from the fact that it samples the quote from J. Robert Oppenheimer talking about the first detonation of a bomb, the whole I am become death, destroyer of worlds thing. I mean, I'm sure y'all have heard it at some point. It's really only tangentially related, but it provides sort of almost an emotional connection to it. This Baby Metal song is almost more in that vein, but it's really its own thing. It's not tangentially related. As you look into it, it's pretty clear that it ties into this, but it's not a literal representation. It's very much focusing on sort of the emotional impact of it, more a message about it than the story of it, if that makes any sense. But how do we see these connections in here? Well, first there are things in the video from Monochrome. You have the one shot of basically just that one umbrella, sort of just the spokes of it, just branching out, which not only kind of looks like a bomb, but there's a couple pieces of footage of nuclear bomb testing that I was reminded of by that. There's one that is sort of, y'all may have seen this one before, it's pretty famous, but it's like this building, and you see just like sort of dust come off of it and just blow away like that. Just for whatever reason, that image gets in my head. I'll edit that one on the screen, and there's another one that I'll have to see if I can find. I've only got sort of a vague recollection of it. But there is another one that it made me think of much more, and I'll have to see if I can find it. Another Editing Luna interjection. I've done some digging, and I'm pretty sure what I was thinking of was that one scene from Barefoot Gin, which, yeah, I'm not editing that into this video. That is a bit too gruesome. Look it up if y'all want to. It is incredibly well done scene, from what I understand, a very accurate representation of what happened. But I'm not putting that in this video because, oh boy. But I do believe that is what I was thinking of. Anyways, I'll get back to the main video now. And it also reminds me of the images of, I believe it is that first test at Trinity, where you see just sort of the frame-by-frame of the explosion happening. It kind of reminded me of that as well. There are a lot of connections there. The umbrella is actually a weird little connection in Hiroshima. There is a mention of when they believe the Grummins are coming to finish them off. Mrs. Nakamura basically protects her children underneath an umbrella. Just a coincidence more than anything else, but a weird little connection I was able to make again. The firework going up, illuminating the city with that bright flash of light and everything, and then the sort of destruction you see, the world falling apart, all that. That's some very clear stuff. I trust I don't have to go too in-depth into that. That is a nuke falling from the sky, bright flash of light, city gets destroyed. That's pretty straightforward there. The tree that you see that basically becomes destroyed is very reminiscent of, there is, I believe, a picture out there. I'll have to see if I can find it again. There's an image I have in my mind, and I think I might have just conjured it up. But I believe there's an image out there of just a tree in the midst of this aftermath. But then there is also several images of that one building in Hiroshima that survived the blast. They're rather iconic one. I believe it is still in the condition it was after the explosion in Hiroshima. I believe I've seen some photos of it. I know it's like sort of a monument now. But it reminds me of that as well. And then at the end, when the life is returning in the end of the video, that, if y'all missed the history section, I'm not going to reread the quote again, but it reminds me of that whole image that was presented in Hersey's book of the greenery returning, the life returning to the city. And then for lyrics, there's so many things. This idea of sort of the sky being lit up by this firework and everything, very clear what that is about. The sky decorated in a spectrum of dreams. I wanted to look at it forever. Even the bright star that was shining yesterday is fading away. That line right there, even the bright star that was shining yesterday is fading away. That just puts in my mind that quote from Mrs. Nakamura, where they flashed a wider white than any she had ever seen. That it puts the sun to shame, right? It is this incredibly powerful light that shines forth. And then being drenched by the rain and freezing in the night. Of course, there was storms that came in shortly afterwards, and a lot of people were just sort of abandoned outside in the cold because they didn't have anywhere else to go, and they couldn't necessarily move themselves. Like in the case of Mrs. Saki, she was basically put under a lean-to with 2 other wounded people and left there for just days on end because she was essentially forgotten about. That, again, a very direct connection. Of course, the idea of Ragnarok as well just reminds me of just nuclear war, just the power of it, that it can destroy the world. There's not a lot of very literal connections here, but there are a lot that you start to put them together, like, it makes too much sense. There's also one more connection I want to point out. At one point, it mentions that the head of Mrs. Nakamura's neighborhood association, I think it was their last name was Nakamoto. I think it would be insane to assume any relation, but it is just another interesting coincidence. So I did have to point that out, just to distract from just the horrors of all of this. But like I said, there's the 3 levels of this, right? You have the lore, can't get into that. You have that sort of surface level meaning of pushing on throughout horrors, throughout hardships, and surviving and everything. That, yes, very good message there. And then you get to that 3rd level, it's some impactful stuff. This is easily the best song I've heard from BABYMETAL lyrically, just incredibly powerful. Oh, I have 47 minutes of audio recorded. This is gonna be a long one. We've still got to get through the review of the music. This is probably going to suffer a bit because I've been ranting about the history for so long. Also, it was light when I started filming. It is It is almost pitch black out now. Oh boy, I got to this late in the day. Let's talk about the music. So, oh, this is too much. The music, starting with the vocals, fantastic. I mean, Sue's vocals were amazing in this. They did remind me a bit of From Dusk Till Dawn and a bit of BBAB with some of that distortion of them, some of the electronic elements. But it was some fantastic vocals. And then I believe if it was Moa doing the sort of I'm not gonna attempt to do it, I don't remember the tune, but that one part in the chorus, I believe that was Moa doing that. It did not sound like Sue's vocals. Just fantastic vocals throughout. I would say much better than the last track. Last track was fantastic, of course, but these were just amazing. The guitar, oh boy, that was some good stuff. You had that heavier guitar, you had the more melodic kind of guitar over top of it. That was just amazing. Great tone. There's another BABYMETAL song that has a nearly identical tone that I can't think of, but it is one of my favorites. That was very nice. That was very nice. The bass actually could pick up on it a little bit. It was solid in here. Would like it to be a bit more apparent. Of course, I always would, but it was very good. The drums, oh boy, the drums were phenomenal. Very, very good drums in here. And then I think there were like some sort of electronic elements as well that were nice. A little spice on top of everything else that I always talk about. That was very good. So yeah, on the whole, I would have liked this to be almost a more emotional song than what we got. Something more in the vein of, say, what's the one I'm thinking of? No Rain, No Rainbow, I think. Something else in the vein of that. This, I think... I think this lacked a bit of the emotional punch it could have had with the music itself. That's really my one complaint with it. Everything else was just beautiful with this one. Absolutely beautiful. This is easily, from this first listen, my favorite BABYMETAL song now. And it will probably, I'll probably grow to love it even more as I listen to it more. But yeah, just phenomenal song. I cannot wait for whatever the next thing will be. I think it'll be coming out sometime next year. I don't remember exactly when they said stuff would release, but yeah, sometime next year. But yeah, that was just, oh, that was amazing, absolutely amazing. I don't have as much to say, mostly just because it's been so long since I've heard it at this point, but that was phenomenal. But it is time to do the song selection for next time. So, let's see what we get. We're up to 25, because in these past 2 weeks, I've been really delayed with reactions because of a variety of reasons. Lots of stuff has come out, lots of stuff I'm looking forward to as well. So, let's give it a spin, see what we get. I'm trying to do a drum roll, it's not working well. Slaughter to Prevail, almost got a Mogus. Really want to check that one out, that's going to be silly. But yeah, Slaughter to Prevail, that is, I believe, their track 1984. Very excited about that. It's some good deathcore. I mean, nothing much to say on it, but very, very excited. I have 4 minutes of battery life left. Or no, that's 4 minutes of that's 4 minutes of storage left, not battery life. I was about to get angry because I charged this camera up all night. But yeah, that is going to do it. So thank y'all for watching. Be sure to like if you liked, subscribe if you want to see more, and comment down below with your own thoughts on the track, any feedback or criticism, or anything you want me to react to. In the description, link to the lyric video so you can go check it out to support the artist. Link to my Discord server, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify playlist of all the songs I've reacted to, at least the ones up on Spotify, and my link tree, which has all my other stuff in case any of that interests y'all. I do have a history channel where I do plan on doing a full-length video on Hiroshima, as well as a full-length video on Nagasaki, and a full-length video on the Manhattan Project. It's sort of a 3-part series. It'll be a long time in the future, I'm sure, but I do plan on it. So, you know, if you want to see more just history stuff that's really higher quality than this was, you go subscribe. I've got some more stuff that'll be coming out hopefully soon. I just gotta actually go and film it. But yeah, that is going to do it. So once again, thank you for watching, and until next time, I'll be seeing ya.